Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. I'm Andy Jarvis and we're at episode 20 today. So if you get to 20 episodes, what are you going to talk about? 2020 cricket. So we're at episode 20, I think. Something like that. Anyway, stick with me. If you're not a cricket fan, please don't hit the stop button now or cancel the download or whatever it is you're thinking of doing. Because while this is an episode about cricket, you don't have to be a cricket fan. This is an episode about marketing. It's a marketing podcast, and that's what it's about. 2020 cricket, 20 years ago nearly now, was the new kid on the block. But the story of how 2020 came into being is pure marketing. It's driven by market research. It's driven by understanding your audience, a clear definition of the problem, and a solution that will solve all of those things for you. How it took off? Different story. Worldwide, global phenomenon. The Indian Premier League, which is the biggest incarnation of 2020 cricket, started last week. This is a league run by billionaire Indian businessmen with all the best players in the world playing in that league. It's an amazing thing, but it started with an idea of how to solve a problem in English domestic cricket. And the man who did that, Stuart Robertson, is the main guest. So stick with me and have a listen to my interview with Stuart. But before we do that, it's time for a T.O.P.T.I.P. T.O.P.T.I.P. We've got Jane Roper from Behind the Ad, who's got a top tip for you about UTM Tracking. Jane, hello.
Hi everyone, my name is Jane and I am the owner of Behind the Ad, a marketing consultancy in Northern Ireland, and we help small business owners understand what marketing tools that they should be using for their business. My top tip today is to use UTM tracking codes. So for anyone that doesn't know what a UTM tracking code is, it basically is a tiny piece of code that we put at the end of a URL, and it helps us identify what individual campaigns or posts are working. So say for example, you're posting to Facebook a lot and you want to know what your posts are doing in terms of performance. You can put a tracking code on each of your posts, and then in your Google Analytics, when people come to your site, you will be able to see what posts are working. And you can do this across various types of mediums. So for example, emails, your paid campaigns, or even digital PR. So that's my top tip. Thanks for listening. I hope that you got loads of value from it, and if you want to reach out, you can find me on Facebook at Behind the Ad or on LinkedIn at Jane Roper. So thanks for that, guys. See you later. Bye.
Right, Jane, thank you very much for that. Check Jane out on Facebook. Details are in the show notes. Just click on the link and yeah, go and say hello and get to meet her there. I've got to know Jane. She's a regular listener of the podcast. Hi, Jane, and it's absolutely fantastic to have you on. Right, let us get into the meat of the interview. Here's what you're here for. I sat down with Stuart Robertson a few weeks ago with a dodgy beard and a baseball cap while he was surrounded by cricket bats to talk cricket. 2020 cricket. Here's how it all started. Have a listen to this and let me know what you think. We couldn't get to episode 20 without talking about cricket. And so here we are on episode 20, talking about 2020. I'm joined by Stuart Robertson, the man who changed cricket. Stuart, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks very, very much. Yeah, all good.
Brilliant. Well, look, before we get into it, there's probably a number of the audience who here in Ireland don't really care about cricket. So before you go switching off, I want to explain this is going to be a marketing podcast. The Strategy Sessions is a marketing podcast. What you may not know about cricket is that the game changed fundamentally because of the man who's joining me today. And it was all driven from pure marketing. That's what we're going to talk about, the process that helped to launch 2020. Do you want to give us just a flavour of, for people who maybe don't know a huge amount about cricket, just give a little bit of a background to the different formats involved in cricket and kind of what role they play?
Yeah, effectively, there are three formats of the game now. Previously, there were just a couple. So the long format of the game, the real kind of Marmite version of cricket is the 2 innings game. It's either the shortest version of that is 4 days, or at international level, 5 days. So that's what a lot of people get turned off by. So that's Test cricket or Championship cricket. There's a 1 day version of the game, which is based on overs, 50 overs a side. So that, but the shortest time slot for that would be about 7 hours. And what we're going to be talking about is how we shortened that much more to fit with consumer demand at the time. So there's a format called 2020, which lasts around 3 hours. So they're fundamentally the three forms.
So the reason I've always been a cricket fan. I started playing as a kid and felt I'd really made it in the world when in my early 20s, I got a job at Durham County Cricket Club. It's 2003. It's the first year 2020 is being launched. I remember cricket being a very different game to what you know now. Yes, it was a professional sport, but most of our professional players only had part-time contracts. They were only professional cricketers with Durham between April and September. And the rest of the year, they were effectively unemployed or could go off and play cricket in different parts of the world. What was the game like when you were working as marketing manager at the ECB, or head of marketing, I think it was, sorry, at the ECB? What was the game like? Give us a feel of what it looked like in the late 90s.
Yeah, interesting to remember. It was still our national summer sport, by the way. I mean, as much as it was, there was those negatives around it. But yeah, I joined the TCCB, the Test and County Cricket Board, as it was called, in 1993. After a short stint in food marketing, I'd done an international business studies degree in Italian, but ended up in food marketing briefly, and then at the TCCB at Lords, this kind of bastion, this massive establishment organization. And it literally was blazers in corridors. It was very much that. The TCCB was separate to the MCC, the organization that runs Lords, but nevertheless, national governing body of the game. And it was a great place to be. It was a fabulous place to be, actually. And but there were lots of people there who were ex-cricketers. The game was sort of run and by a lot of ex-cricketers for cricketers, it felt at the time. So it was a marketeer coming into that space. I think we'll probably go on to talk hopefully a bit more about this, but this is where I guess it just wasn't that sort of consumer-oriented approach. It was, very well organized, very well structured. In terms of popularity, when England played, and especially when they played Ashes tests, it was incredibly popular. Cricket was alive and kicking at the international level. Where we had an issue was really about popularizing the domestic game, as we call it, so the club game, the 18 professional counties who played that game. So, and also, actually, really importantly, there was my first job in cricket at the TCCB was working at the recreational level. Before I became marketing manager fully for the organisation, I was looking after trying to market and commercialise a little bit more grassroots cricket and help all those volunteers and people at the grassroots of the game, because to create that virtuous circle of a healthy foundation supporting the professional top of the game.
So if you've seen cricket, a county cricket, the domestic game where I worked, if you see the championship game where players are wearing all white, kind of very traditional cricket, if you look beyond the action on the field, what you would have seen in the stands was a lot of very nicely coloured seats with very few people in them. And this was kind of a problem within the game. The championship cricket, test cricket starts about 11 o'clock in this country, runs till about 6 o'clock, which is perfectly when most of us are at work. And it is beloved by retirees and elderly people, and even people who love cricket don't really go along to watch too much of that because they can't. It doesn't fit in with life. And this was the problem in the game, as you said, was run by cricketers. So the cricket was really strong, but that consumer focus maybe just wasn't there. So what was the driving factor to make a change?
Well, actually, just before I come on to answer that question, because there was a very specific driving factor, but just worth maybe understanding the economics of cricket really as to why that was important. The vast majority of cricket as a sport's professional revenues came from the international side and from broadcasting revenues and some top level sponsorship revenues coming into the game at that level. So the be all and end all, if you like, from a commercial driver was the value of that international team. To create the best international team, we needed a strong county game to produce those cricketers who would go up to play for the England team when they were sort of playing those international games. So in a sense, a lot of county cricket was done to create international players to a point, certainly from a commercial perspective. So although those spectators, there were few of them going to county matches, the income from the counties was they took a big share of those international revenues from the whole game. So there was not a massive driver necessarily to be sort of selling tickets, selling memberships at the local level as much, because there was a bit of a handout coming from the international revenues for the game. So it's quite important to understand that. The absolute driver for the change that brought 2020 into the world was a 17% decline in domestic attendances over a 5-year period in the run-in to 2000. So part of my role at that time as marketing manager at the ECB was to keep an eye on sort of general attendances. We weren't selling tickets directly and centrally at the TCCB or the ECB, the England and Wales Cricket Board, as it had become by then. It was the guys like you, it was the counties who were selling those tickets for international matches and for domestic games. So I was keeping an eye on that and using sort of metrics, attendance metrics, membership figures and the like. And international cricket was okay. It was doing fine, depending on who the opposition was, how well England were playing at the time. Stadia were pretty full for most of those games. But at the domestic level, across the board, we saw a consistent year-on-year decline in attendances. And there aren't many businesses, organizations that can sustain that level of perpetual decline. And that was the point we said, look, we need to do something about this.
Yeah. So 17% decline over 5 years it's horrifying. You know, if you look at your own business and you think 17% decline over 5 years, you'd be running for the hills and trying to do something. There's still a bit of an amateur hangover in cricket at the time when you're there. A lot of cricketers in senior positions. Was there a push to say, look, okay, we'll just introduce a new cricket competition, or we know what the answer to this problem is? Did you have to sort of fight to go out and do any research, or was it a case of the problem was compelling enough that it was an open door you were pushing at?
Depending who you're talking to, Andy, to be honest. So interestingly, and someone who doesn't get a lot of credit for 2020, who should get more, is a guy called John Carr. He was the director of cricket at the ECB at the time, and he had seen short form cricket. I mean, we'd all seen short form cricket. You know, when you talk about the recreational game at club level, all around the country on Tuesday nights or Thursday nights or midweek evenings, 20 over cricket, 18 over cricket had been played for decades. And there'd been a little go in New Zealand a few years before we got into this, and John had seen that. And actually, before I got properly involved, 3 years before that, we'd asked a question, you know, is this something worth looking at? But there really wasn't any insight supporting it. So it really depended who you were talking to. Some people, you know, and even after we launched it, said, this is ridiculous, this is going to destroy the game. But there were very much enough enlightened people from a commercial background. Terry Blake, who was a commercial director at the ECB in those days, my boss, was into this. And also the chairman of the ECB at the time was Lord McLaurin, who'd been chairman of Tesco's and Vodafone. So someone who's pretty up to speed with consumer demand and consumer propositions. So there were enough people. I was knocking on enough of an open door with enough people to get the funding to do the consumer research, which gave us ultimately the argument and the information and the insight to get this voted through. But that's a whole story in its own right.
So what was the process then? Because you've got, you're dealing with a national institution. Everyone who is a cricket fan has an opinion on the game. And that's the same with all sports, right? You're dealing with the crown jewels to them. So you set out, you've got a huge decline as a backdrop. So that's your situation. You've got the go ahead to do some research to start looking at what's the answer. What did you do? Did you have an answer in mind and you set out to try and prove that? Or did you go out and go, okay, let's just look at the research and see what that tells us? What was your approach to that?
Yeah, a little bit of both, actually. So we'd seen this. There was enough intelligence, enough insight, enough experience at the governing body to have an idea what the problem was going to be. And in terms of what you'd said earlier on, you know, championship cricket lasting for 4 days, played during the day when people are at work and at school. So we clearly had an idea. But the actual process was, first of all, we had to secure the funding to do a proper piece of consumer research. So Channel 4 were the terrestrial broadcaster at the time, and they were ripping up the rule book as far as broadcasting cricket was concerned. So it was just at the right time. They were marketing the game with and alongside us. They were putting grassroots programs in, educational programs in, cultural programs in. They had Paul Oakenfold on Clapham Common playing to 70,000 people that evening after they'd shown live Test cricket. So actually, as conservative as the game was, in most cases, it was starting to turn. So they put £250,000 up to help us do some proper consumer research, and probably the first piece of consumer research, significant consumer research we'd done as the governing body. So I appointed an agency to help us with that. And we ended up doing a 3-phase research program. So we did a desk audit first. We wanted to make sure that we had everything in place, that we knew exactly what the data, as best as we could, was telling us, just to reinforce that 17% decline and make sure it was accurate. We then ended up with a qualitative phase. So we did 30 research groups, quality groups across the country. Mm-hmm. What we also wanted to do, though, was talk to people who we felt were underrepresented in cricket audiences. So just looking around the grounds, you could see that there was a older middle-aged, middle-class white male tendency in very general terms. So we wanted to talk to people who we didn't see very often at ground. So they were the children and women and families, inner city communities, ethnic minorities, people that we felt should be and could be in cricket, but actually weren't. So we did a lot of that to build up that insight. And then we tested that insight with a quantitative phase at the end of it. And the younger marketeers watching this podcast will laugh their socks off when they know that we did a 4,500, what was called an omnibus survey in those days. I'm going to sound like such an old fart now, but we had 4,500 questionnaires taken into representative households across the country, where the householder randomly sampled would be asking questions about cricket that evening. And again, I'll come to more detail on that in a second, but it was so that was it, 3 phases of research, and that sort of gave us the insight and the quantitative, the statistical backing that we needed.
Honestly, the kids today don't know the born, do they? They talk about research and they're like, oh, well, we could send this out to our email database of 10,000. We might get a 20% open rate, and then we get an 8%. So yeah, that's fine. We'll end up with, and you're like, you don't know you're born. Remember the days of people with clipboards? Oh, geez. Good old-fashioned research. So out of that, you get an enormous amount of data. And, the old lies, damn lies, and statistics phrase is running around my head at the minute. How did you go from that phase of, right, we've got all this information.
Yeah.
We've got to then turn it into a product. And you mentioned the New Zealand, was it Max Cricket or something it was called in New Zealand?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to come back to that a little bit down the line as well, because Max Cricket was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And please feel free to talk about it. And I want to talk about the 100 through the lens of Max Cricket as well as we get a bit further into the story. But what did you do? You've got, numbers coming out of your ears. You've got people in focus groups saying, I read the cricket scores every day in the newspapers. Well, when did you last go to a game? 10 years ago. Why is that? I'm busy. You've got all of this rich research. What did you do with it?
So we had to simplify it was the short answer. We had to, in any kind of change management, you can do all the research you like, you can create the strongest argument, identify that the benefits of change and implementing that change. If you can't persuade the decision makers to get whatever this change through, that you're wasting your time. So we had to simplify this down to really digestible solution to a really understandable problem. So we had a pretty identifiable problem: 17% decline in domestic attendances, not getting any better. The insight has told us very clearly that the key issue with cricket at the time was inaccessibility, and that was the word that kept coming through. And we defined that in various ways. It was structurally inaccessible, as in it was played at a time that the product was not available when people were available to watch it in the main. It was socially inaccessible to a lot of people. Women thought it was a game for men, that they wouldn't be welcome at the ground. They wouldn't have facilities. Children thought that it was for grown-ups. Inner city communities felt that it was a posh sport. We even had in the insight, don't I need a blazer and a tie to go and watch a game? And And so there were whole loads of barriers to entry, and accessibility was key to all of that. So that we were able to kind of deliver that very powerfully and quite clearly into various vox pops and little video shots and all sorts. But quantifying that, again, it came down to a pretty simple set of questions and answers. So we were asking people why they didn't go to cricket. What were the kind of key reasons they didn't go? And we were able to show that and quantify what I'd said earlier about that sort of the demographic for cricket consumer at the time was that middle-aged, middle-class white male. And we then asked a sort of bit of a killer question. Well, look, we understand it's an accessibility issue. If we offered you a cricket product, which was played when you could watch it, and it wasn't boring in inverted commas, it had a closure, it lasted 3 hours, and it was played after school and after work, how likely would you be to come to those games? So we showed a graph where all of the people who were massively under-indexed in attending cricket, women, children, families, inner city communities, all the rest of it, they were massively under-indexed in current attendance. When asked that question, how likely would you be to attend a game that was met your needs? They massively over-indexed. And the two slides, and these were very basic slides at the time, I remember sort of constructing them, and they literally flipped. So that demographic who said not interested here, absolutely interested when asked that question. So we basically constructed the presentation, the argument, the statistically backed insight for that. But then that was only the start of it. I mean, that took a lot of lobbying, ultimately in the end. And so what we were very careful to do as well, we knew that this was going to be tricky and difficult and unpalatable to a lot of people. So we tried to take the stakeholders with us on that journey. I presented, for example, at the annual general meeting of the Professional Cricketers Association meeting. So all the representatives of all the players get together once a year, and I presented at that meeting to tell them what we were thinking of doing. We then presented the findings the following year after the research had been completed, and started to get the players thinking about, okay, well, we're the guys that are going to be having to kind of deliver and play this product. We did the same with you guys, with the marketeers, and during that process, probably just before you started at Durham, we were showing the research, we were taking the marketing teams along with us, same with the chief executives of the counties, because the decision-making body that was going to get this through or not was an organization called the First Class Forum. So this was effectively, it was the chairman and the chief executive of each of the 18 first class counties, the professional counties, plus the chairman and chief executive of the MCC, the people who own Lord's Cricket Ground. So those 19 votes were what it was going to come down to at the end of the day. And
sorry, Stuart, am I right in thinking as well that generally speaking, the people around that table are going to look very much like the people who are already turning up at cricket anyway? Middle-aged white men who massively over-index in terms of wealth compared to the rest of the nation. It is broadly what you've got in that room in the First Class Forum.
That's exactly, but actually older. I wouldn't say middle-aged. They were often older, middle-aged, if not old. And so that they were, look, they'd earned their stripes. That these were experienced people, often had run businesses themselves. But the problem with that was that they were in that room. Not only did they look like the people who were coming to cricket, they were voted in by those people as well. So the way that the county clubs operated mainly in the time was they were members clubs. So you might have a membership at a first-class county like Essex, say, of 2,000 or 3,000 members at the time, equivalent to season ticket holders, who were all in that category pretty much, or the vast majority were. So they didn't like change. They liked their county championship. Thank you very much. They weren't banging on the door saying, we need more kids running around this ground, screaming and shouting and cheering. We need more. So there was a bit of a mandate almost when it came to this vote that the chairman there were thinking also about, well, who am I representing with this vote? And there was a real conflict. The more enlightened were looking at it thinking, I need to vote this in for the future of the game, not just for me getting voted back in as chairman when my term is up. So there was a bit of nuance, and that's why I kind of reference we can do all the consumer research we like. We can get the product nailed down as much as you like, but if you can't persuade the decision makers and understand who those decision makers are, all that could be wasted. So,
when was the meeting with the First Class Forum? Is this about sort of 2000, 2001?
Yeah, exactly. So it was 2001, and after we'd done commissioned the research, no, in fact, no, we did the research in 2001, and this was a meeting in April 2002, I think it was.
Yeah. Sleepless nights.
Yeah, massively, and not just for me, but we knew that we'd put all the work into this. We developed the product, and we had this concept, we had the idea set up, and the night before this meeting, this was one of those classic boardroom meetings you can imagine, sort of massive long table at Lord's, everyone gathered around the room, and it took, with all the lobbying we'd done, it still took the chairman of the ECB to be ringing round some of the chairmen that we thought would be wavering on this, to try and say to them the night before, lobbying, that look, we need to get behind this, you need to do this. Mm-hmm. So it got to the morning, it got to the presentation. There were various, this was part of the board meeting of the ECB effectively. So there was a slot for this short form game. My boss introduced it. I presented the research. We went through the whole arguments, and then every county chairman was given an opportunity to say a few words. And it started everyone was sat alphabetically around a table. So it starts at Derbyshire, then Durham, and it went all the way around. And chairman, some were very, very anti and very vociferously against it. Some was a bit ambivalent, some were very for it. And it was impossible to know how the vote was going to go. And it needed a majority vote in that room that day in order for this to get through and give us the green light to progress.
Just to jump back one stage before this. So in cricket at the time, you've got the championship cricket, 4 days wearing white. But the one-day game had been introduced via Australia, I think, with Kerry Packer and TV and cricket under floodlights and stuff like that, which was, in theory, to answer this problem of making cricket more fun, more accessible, shorter, easier to watch, and had been a qualified success, really. The World Cup one-day event, and then, the whites had been ditched and the coloured clothing had come in. And there was razzmatazz, for want of a better word, in one-day cricket. How much pressure was there on you to just say, right, just fix the one-day competition, because that should answer these problems? So you've got the research. How much pressure is there to say, well, actually, we can just tweak what we've got, or we have to introduce something new?
Yeah, really good question, because I think that's a function of time. So there was pressure to do that. We were working and trying to make that sort of that one-day game more accessible, I guess. So that interestingly had ranged for a number of overs, and therefore time that game was played. There was a 45 over version of it. There was a 40 over version, a 50 over version. At one point, there was a 60 over version of one-day cricket. But the fundamental problem with it was that even at its shortest format, at say 40 or 45 overs aside, that's still 6 hours to 7 hours worth of time that we're expecting these young new consumers that we wanted to bring into the game to give up. And when can you play that? It only could be at weekends, and scheduling didn't allow that to happen. So even with floodlights, you're still looking at a game that is and not all grounds had floodlights. So it was a difficult thing to do. So that was not going to be the solution. It might have been, it certainly was when that was introduced, but society had changed. People were moving on. People were becoming more cash rich, more time poor. And what was accessible 20 years beforehand was no longer seen as very accessible. And we needed something that really, really was delivered when people could come and watch it.
So the vote went your way. Well, I'm assuming it went your way because 2020 cricket started. And what was the fallout from that decision? Because cricket is, as you say, a conservative game. Change. Football. I always say, football games and rugby games. If you look back at the old pitches in 1830 or whatever, were just masses of crowds of people, trying to get the ball from one end of a village to another. And that could go on for hours and days. And then they started to introduce structure and rules and regulations. I mean, cricket only added a 5-day limit to tests in the 50s, was it? It used to be timeless tests at some point. And it's a game that evolves slowly. So all of a sudden you come in with what amounts to revolution or heresy in many quarters. What was the fallout from that decision?
So interestingly, I think one of the things I was proudest with of that whole program and bringing it to life was, as we mentioned earlier on, working with those stakeholders through the process, because the vote actually was 11-7 in favor, with the MCC abstaining. So 1 or 2 votes the other way, and 2020 may not be around. Who knows? So it was very, very close. The morning we made that presentation to those county chairmen, there was a meeting of the marketing directors, commercial directors, marketing managers of all the 18 counties. And I gave the very same presentation that I gave that afternoon to their chairman, to those marketing managers. And I said to them at the end of that presentation, right, if you were your boss this afternoon voting on this, how would you vote? And the marketing teams, the commercial teams in that room unanimously voted in favor of 2020, because they were at the sharp end. They could see, they were in touch with their consumers. They wanted to bring more people in. So once the chairman, even though 7 county chairmen had said, no, thanks very much, they kind of threw it to the people to deliver it, which were their marketing teams, and said, right, we better get on with this then. So because we'd done all the work in the run up to this, and we then had a year to then implement and refine the product and put it out there, we had the right people with us. We very quickly, we'd been talking to the media, we'd been talking to the broadcasters. We then carried on that lobbying. We actually took a media trip out to Spain, to Valderrama for a weekend, and talking about all things cricket, but 2020 was a big part of that.
Sounds terrible.
It was a fantastic trip, but part of it was presenting just what I've described, and just to get the media on side. So by the time we came a year later to delivering this and launching it, we had so many people on side. The players were on side with us, more or less. Some were still a little bit skeptical, I have to say, but more or less were on side. We had the county team, the people who were going to deliver these games, were fully on board with all of this, and people were getting very excited about delivering it. Sky, who were the broadcasters then, BBC through their radio station, they were all ready to give this the best shot. There were still a lot of naysayers. And in fact, it came round to the morning of the first ever game. And I was on the Radio 4 Today program in the morning in the studio, and I was giving it all of this and saying how this is changing cricket, this is going to be amazing. And Sarah Montague said, well, we've got someone on the line who's maybe not quite as convinced as you, Stuart. And they brought Brian Close on, who was a very traditional Yorkshire ex-player, administrator, and pretty much said, this is a disgrace. It is going to ruin the game. This is not going to survive. What are they doing? It's ridiculous. So there were a lot of people still to be convinced, but we had enough people with us.
Am I right in thinking Brian Close is the one? You can find a YouTube clip of him wearing what appears to be his school shirt, batting for England, no helmet and gloves, which look like walking gloves these days, facing some fearsome fast bowling and just wearing every ball that comes his way rather than trying to hit it just to prove how tough he was. And you picked a fight with him.
Absolutely, that's the man, that's the guy. I mean, an amazing player, an amazing servant to the game, but he was of an era. You're absolutely right. Didn't believe in those pads, and he wouldn't flinch when he was hit by a ball at 85, 90 miles an hour by a West Indian bowler. But yeah, there were a lot of people like that who were just still not into this.
So 2003, the competition launched, was my first year at Durham. I was fed, I'd missed a lot of this research, but I was fed it all as I started in marketing executive there. From memory, our biggest crowd at a one-day game that year. So we had championship cricket taking place, which attracted no more than 1,000 people on any given day.
Yeah.
We had one-day cricket. I think from memory, we had about a 3,000 crowd in that day, which was the biggest crowd we'd seen in a long time, and was a good day. We had Yorkshire on a sunny day, closest game, loads of people turned up. We started selling tickets for the 2020. We didn't give it away free to members. We started selling tickets, and it became really obvious that there was something going on. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think on the first ever game, which was a Tuesday night, it was against rubbish opposition, or Derbyshire. I say rubbish opposition. In Durham, nobody cared about playing Derbyshire. We had a northern group. We had Lancashire, we had Yorkshire, we had Durham, we had Notts, and Durham, Derbyshire were the least sexy opposition. And I think we had them on a Tuesday night. and we had about 4,500 people turn up. So you might be going, wow, that's not very many people. But it was 50% bigger than the biggest crowd we'd had for the rest of the season. And everybody paid. Nobody got that game for free.
Yeah.
The next game was, I think, Yorkshire on a Friday night. We had over 6,000 in. I don't think we had enough stewards for the game. It was like panic stations. We were running around going, what do? We don't have enough burger vans open. We haven't got enough toilets open. We haven't got enough stewards. It was fantastic. So was the success in that early stage of the game, was it everything you expected, or did it blow you away, or were you a bit disappointed?
Definitely not disappointed, and I think it was. Look, I'm a naturally optimistic kind of guy. I was really confident in what we'd done. I was really excited about this, but yeah, it probably even exceeded my expectations. You're absolutely right. That first day when we wanted to see just who was coming through the gates, because a lot of this cricket didn't, and maybe still doesn't in some areas, have a culture of advance ticket sales. There's quite a lot of capacity at grounds. Often you don't need to buy a ticket months and months in advance. It's a perpetual problem for the marketeers and at cricket grounds. So we didn't know until the game started, really, finally, how many people were going to be walking through the doors, and we were ringing around all the grounds to sort of see how it happened, and we just got report after report after report of stadiums filling up, and it was absolutely fantastic. The response and the reaction was exactly what we wanted. It was the right demographic. All the people we've been targeting were coming through those gates, and it gives me goosebumps now even just talking about it. It was fantastic. Yeah.
It's hard to describe it. And again, this is why hopefully if you're listening and you're thinking, right, marketing podcast, you can see what we talked about. There was a problem identified, there was research, there's stakeholder engagement, there's a new product born out of talking to your customers. And too many marketers still to this day don't talk enough to their customers. So you've got a product and it's a runaway success. But actually, it's not just been a success in England, has it? I mean, today we are less than 12 hours when we're doing this interview after the IPL auction. So cricket is the biggest game in India. There's 1 billion people in India, and it feels like almost everyone is a cricket fan. It's not everyone, but it is almost everyone. And India took 2020 and took it onto another level. Australia and New Zealand took the game on and did great things with it. India launched what they call the Indian Premier League, which is franchise cricket supported by millionaires and billionaires in India, who then started buying in all the best players from around the world to play for their franchises. So we're talking about 2003, as I said, when I started, players on part-time contracts, playing for 30, 40,000 pounds a year, well, for 6 months. It was still decent money at the time. To the Indian Premier League starting a few years later and players being bought for $1.5 million US, $1.5 million US, that is, for a 6-week contract. It changed the game fundamentally, and this has got your fingerprints all over it. I know you're handing off the credit to other people, but this is your baby that's changed one of the world's biggest sports, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. It really has. I mean, it changed the economics of the game in the UK first, in England and Wales, because on a more modest basis, but still, people, counties and grounds were taking as much in ticket revenue for 4 or 5 2020 matches as they were from all other forms of income from their membership and other forms of attendance in those grounds. So they suddenly had this huge kind of, in relative terms, injection of cash into their businesses that they were responsible for themselves, rather than just getting the handout from ECB's international revenue. So it changed the economics of the game in this country and definitely saved a number of counties in the process. And you're then right, absolutely. It then caught the imagination globally. And in fact, India didn't really wake up to it for a couple of years, actually. They won the inaugural 2020 World Cup. The ICC got hold of this, which is the international governing body. India played in that. They were a powerhouse of cricket at test and one-day level. But they were sniffy about T20 to start with, and won the World Cup. And then a really incredible guy called Lalit Modi, who was the first commissioner of the IPL, got hold of it, working for the BCCI, the governing body in India. And you're right, he just married together those two amazing things in India: Bollywood, entertainment, and cricket, the two sort of religions almost, and brought those together in this feast of entertainment, and they were able to put budgets to it that we just didn't have. And as innovative as we were, as creative as you guys all were in the counties to deliver T20 and do a lot of off-field activity and entertainment elements as well, India just had the resources to go ballistic with it, and they did an incredible job. And hats off to them. I'm often asked, was that, did we look at whether that was going to be, international expansion was one of the things that we were planning? And absolutely not. No.
Just say yes, Stuart. Just say yes. Yeah, of course it was all part of the plan.
Yeah, of course we did. Of course we did. And
sorry, I was going to say, if you don't know anything about India, if you've never been, we're often in this country fed lots of stuff from America. So we maybe miss out on some of the scale and the size of things that happen in India. So I think SRK, a Bollywood, ridiculously famous Bollywood actor, Shah Rukh Khan, I think his full name is. He was one of the owners of one of the first franchises. So you've effectively got the Brad Pitt of India owning a cricket team, which had, I think, MS Dhoni, who was the David Beckham of Indian cricket at the time, in play. Imagine Brad Pitt buying Manchester United and signing Lionel Messi to play for them. That's kind of what happened in India when the IPL took off. And if there was a moment, I remember it, people talking in meetings, everyone sitting there going, what the hell is happening? It was just, it was mind-blowing. So I want to fast forward a little bit and stay talking about cricket. So 2020 is flying everywhere. India, the IPL is still huge. There's the Pakistan Super League, the Bangladesh have got one, the Big Bash in Australia, New Zealand have got a competition. Everyone's cashing in on 2020 and it's going really well. Except in England, where 2020, we almost tried to kill the golden goose because it was bringing in so much money for counties. They wanted more and more cricket. There is a little structural backdrop to this as well, is that England is the only country that plays cricket across the English summer. Most of the other places play in what we term as winter. So access to the best players in the world can be a bit tricky sometimes because they're often doing other things at different times. So we never quite got all the stars in one place like the Indian Premier League did. And because we were trying to play it across a whole summer rather than in a short window. And 2020 never really kicked on and boomed. After an initial launch, it then plateaued and maybe even declined a little, which has then led the governing body to look at introducing a new format called the 100, which should have been launched in 2021, but has been put back. Oh, sorry, it should have been launched in 2020 and is now going to be launched in 21. Talk to me about your thoughts on that, about what happened with 2020 domestically in this country, and was there any saving it? Do you think the ECB should have looked at launching another new format next year?
So fascinating debate, this one. In a nutshell, I think we got greedy. The game got greedy with 2020. The first iteration of 2020 in 2003, the competition was over in 18 days. It was a real feast and festival of that format of the game, concentrating people's focus, attention, the limited resources we had to market this, advertise it, talk about it, amplify it. It was better done in a short period of time to do that. But because the counties realised, and we realised, the game realised just what a cash cow this potentially was, those smaller counties that have small stadiums but don't have international cricket, which is a big source of income for them. So your smaller counties wanted more and more and more 2020 because they could happily fill 3,000 seats, which is the capacity at the smallest ground, twice in a week, twice in 10 days, and do that for a number of weeks on end. The bigger grounds, who were also focusing on international cricket and other, just didn't seem to have the resources and the demand to keep the stadiums full. And full stadiums was what it was all about. That's where the atmosphere gets locked in. If you're part of an event that feels popular, looks popular, is popular, you want to go, and it drives demand. The minute you start seeing a tail off and gaps in stadiums and a little perceived lack of popularity, you start ending up on a bit of a slide. So there was almost two tiers in T20 in this country. The big stadiums weren't quite filling their stadiums as they had previously. The smaller grounds were and wanted more and more of it. So if you look at the stats, you will see that the aggregate total attendance at 2020 over its lifetime in the UK has continued to increase every year. But because we played more and more games, average attendance per game declined. And that was becoming a bit of an issue. So we then desperately and definitely needed to introduce something else into the mix. And that is where the debate around 100 started. There are two ways of potentially being able to do that. One would have been to go back to less is more, but the genie's out the bottle. How are you going to tell some grounds that they can't have as much of this amazing thing as they've had? You could have developed a two-tier system. So maybe played a Premier League, put a lot of the resources, attract the best players into that. But then because it's a sort of democratic sport where every county has the same vote, you're a small county thinking, well, I'm going to get marooned in the second division here. I'm going to miss out on all this exposure. Why am I going to vote for, Turkey's voting for Christmas? So I think ultimately the ECB had no choice. They ended up with a semi-political decision. They needed to do something more with this short form game, re-inject the excitement, bring the best players in the world into it. The options to kind of split up the existing 18 counties and create a different form, or keep playing 2020, was just unpalatable. So the decision, the brave decision they took, which I kind of admire, was to say, we need to differentiate a new turbocharged version of the short form of the game from the existing T20. And that's why they came up with a slightly different format called the 100.
Now, we're not going to turn this into the Cricket Badgers podcast, so I'm not going to go into the rule changes for the 100. But from a marketing perspective, and I've got a blog half written about this, which I didn't publish because they pushed back the 100, launched it because of the pandemic. But it's about where do you place the line? There's a line someone said to me once about a three-legged dog is still a dog. And if you change some rules of cricket, it's still cricket. But to me, there's almost a line in the branding house, if you want to call it that at some point you push it so far and it stops being the game. So what are the things that are core to the game and have to be kept? And what other things can you play around with to try and make something different? So one of the things they've changed is there's only 100 balls, hence the name, and it's all done in a certain time limit. But 6 balls in an over has been the way cricket has been for about 80 years, maybe a number of, it's been formulating the rules. But one of the things in the 100 is one over or some overs are going to be 10 balls. Now, is that pushing the line too far away that it no longer feels like cricket? Or will it, because that line is close enough to that everything else is still the same as just more balls? And what I feel about the 100, without having seen it played yet, is I think that they've pushed the line a long way to crossing it. Now, whether they have crossed it or not, only time will tell. And as an example, to go back to what you mentioned about what T20 was in New Zealand, where it was called Cricket Max or something like that.
Yeah.
While it looked and felt like cricket, they had things like zones on the outfield where if the ball landed in there, you got double the number of runs or something, didn't there? So there was tweaks to the game to make it more exciting. But what they did effectively was just push the line too far and make it more difficult for people to understand. And I think when you listen to the criticism of the 100, it sounds a lot like the criticism of 2020, but it's not Brian Close these days saying it, but somebody else is ringing up, Radio 4, frothing about it, going, oh, it's disgusting, it'll kill the game. It's the same criticism. But I think the difference with 2020 to the 100 is 2020 was a game that every amateur cricketer around the country has played. The 100 isn't. And I think that's a point where I think the line has been pushed a long way. Do you have any, I've waffled a little bit there, Stuart, but do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think they've pushed it too far? Would you like to see them go further?
I think it's close, but I don't think it's gone too far. It's really interesting. You're right. We looked at Cricket Max and thought that was too gimmicky. It brought in too many new elements but mainly because the important thing was we were introducing 2020, just back to that for a second, as a means to an end. We wanted to bring a new audience in, provide that sample product, if you like, to the longer form game. We never wanted 2020 to be an end in itself and people only to watch 2020. We wanted them to fall in love with cricket, or at least like cricket, and then sample the longer form of the product. It's your sort of promotional product in a sense. And so we didn't want it to look too different from the bigger game. I think that's changed a bit, and I think we do accept that some people won't ever want to watch 4 days of cricket and are happy watching a diet of the short form game. So bring that into the 100. I'm not quite so worried. I think for sure the cricket cognoscenti, those people who still love their championship cricket, their 4-day cricket, their 7-hour cricket, they're not probably going to like the 100 ever. And is that a problem? Is that really a problem? If the marketing is right, if the promotion is right, if the new audiences are targeted and persuaded properly to do this, it won't be long before there's new generations of kids coming into these games that don't really worry about a 6 ball over versus a 10 ball over. It's the spectacle, it's the entertainment, it's the social occasion, it's time with their parents, it's a sporting, it's athleticism, it's music, it's all of the things that go with it. And I'm not sure it has to relate directly to a game that people play on a Tuesday night on their local rec or somewhere else. So I don't think they have gone too far. And I think it's an interesting, one of the really interesting things I heard about this was, it's quite interesting that cricket is still played on an imperial basis. It's 6 ball overs. It's back to pounds and shillings almost. It's at least 100 is digitizing the game. Finally, it's only taken till 2021 to do that.
The pitch is still going to be a chain in length, though, isn't it? That's the problem. But well, look, what I want to do now, I want to jump back even to the further to the dim and distant past. I remember having a beer with you many, many years ago at a cricket event, and you said to me, "Oh, I started my career in the milk marketing board," and I just remember thinking, "It's like, was that still a thing? How old are you?" But tell us a little bit about that. What was marketing graduate job at the milk marketing board? What did you learn there? What that set you up for your career?
Yeah, I loved that. They had a pretty good graduate training program, actually. So as I said, I've done an international business studies degree. I really kind of focused on marketing and actually HR, personnel as it was called in those days. So I fired off CVs after my degree to industries I was interested in working in. That was sport, motor industry, and the food industry. And I sent a set of CVs off for personnel and a set of CVs off for marketing. The first one that I kind of came back was this food marketing job at the Milk Marketing Board. But what they did is that they put a cohort of graduates each year through the full marketing mix, which was brilliant. So it was from R&D, we literally had hands in vats making cheese, through to actually out selling products at trade shows and everything in between. So it was a really, really genuinely good insight into the full marketing mix being delivered. And it was great, and I ended up in the sponsorship team, the product marketing team, and the Milk Marketing Board then had a promotional campaign to get kids drinking more milk effectively, and they were putting fridges into primary school classrooms, and they sponsored Quick Cricket, which was the short form of cricket. So that was my introduction to the world of cricket, and I was looking after the sponsorship from the client side, from the sponsor side, and I was invited to go over to the T.P.T.I.P to help commercialize Quick Cricket and kind of create that, a bit of a marketing product out of that. So it was a brilliant introduction to the world of marketing.
So when we first met you, you'd left the ECB, you'd moved to Warwickshire. I think you ran the marketing there, and then you were Hampshire, and then you moved to be CEO of the Hampshire Foundation, which is a slightly different role, where you're responsible for a lot more than just the marketing and the consumer experience. What was that transition like, moving from marketing to CEO?
Yeah, I think it's really useful. I mean, there's lots of ways into those sort of CEO positions, aren't there? And very often you see sort of the finance route in. There's a lot of people that end up sort of coming through FD and then into CEO roles. And there's a lot of merit to that, because at the end of the day, numbers are very important in any business. Where I think ultimately, and it kind of depends a bit what business you're in, but I always believe that as a marketeer, we are so in tune with our consumer needs. Ultimately, whatever you're doing, whether it's a service or a product industry, you need someone to buy that at some point, and to understand that that's what's going to keep the wheels turning of your business. So I think there's a really useful for marketeers to end up in CEO positions, because they have such a broad perspective. Now, I'm absolutely not an FD, and it really doesn't interest me loads, and it's the end. So I would always need in that position somebody absolutely finger on the pulse from a numbers perspective. I often have debates. I think marketing does give the most general perspective of any discipline, really, over what a product or service company is delivering to its consumer at the end of the day. So the only thing I wish I'd had in my career a bit more experience of was direct sales.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have helped. I was very much a marketeer, very more into the research, into insight, into branding, into the whole value proposition, the customer proposition. But direct experience of working on a market stall somewhere, absolutely pulling that trigger and making that sale, because I think it's really important. It's often the clash between marketeers and salespeople, but it's two sides of the same coin, and you really need to understand. So, any advice for anyone coming into marketing these days, I always tell, kids coming into from graduate positions, if you can, try and get some full-on direct sales experience, because I think it will just make you a better marketeer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there is this tension, isn't there? Marketing and sales teams everywhere hating each other. We make the money, you spend the money, and all this sort of tension. But look, at the end of the day, we should both be making each other's lives easier.
Yeah.
The number of times, certainly in B2B organizations where sales teams seem to run the show. I know when I'm consulting there, it's often a challenge just to get their ear at first. But once you get it and they start to understand that you can make their life easier, like, okay, they buy into that. And tell us, where are you now? Not so much you're sat in your office at home, but where are you working now? And what are you doing? Because I think, you've had an interesting move, out of sport and into something different.
Yeah, I mean, I was 26 years in sports administration, cricket administration. So you could argue I should have left years and years and years ago, and I probably had 3 or 4 opportunities to do it, but also had 3 or 4 opportunities to stay within the game, and I've enjoyed it. But now time has come to move on, and I'm a brand strategist now. So I work for a creative branding agency, a regional agency based in Winchester, but honestly, one of the best agencies I've ever worked for. So I'm the commercial and strategy director there. It's on a massive upward growth curve, brilliant agency who are mainly around brand development, but also moving image, fantastic production team there, CGI, VFX, and I am loving it. I mean, it really is. It's a small organization compared to those I've worked with in the past. So I've joined a leadership team. There are 20 of us. We're moving premises soon. We're expanding to 50 in the next couple of years. But actually to be really back at the sharp end and working and solving problems around value propositions, customer propositions, but using brand to do that is always a part of marketing I've enjoyed. And actually to be out there right now is fantastic.
Do you think that change in pace between 2000, 2001, where you're doing an omnibus survey with bits of paper and banging on people's doors, to this sort of instant access to data that we have now in the digital world, is that an improvement?
Yeah, yes, it is. I'm not a Philistine. I think I like change. I like improvements. I think you just got to harness it in the right way. There is so much data out there that it's easy to get lost in it. I'm a simple guy. I kind of like simple solutions, and often you can overcomplicate stuff too much. And I think it's easy with so much access to so much quick data to overcomplicate things. I think it's always useful just to remember the basics, whatever those basics mean in your organization or to your consumer base or to your stakeholders, whatever it is. So I think I love the kind of the depth of knowledge that we've got, but the volume of it means that we end inevitably being a little bit shallow at times in what we look at. But I think it's just managed to see the wood for the trees and being able to kind of keep it as simple as your task needs it to be. But yeah, very different.
A call for simplicity. Look, I absolutely love that. More of that, please, definitely. So just before we wrap up, Stuart, I've got 2 questions to ask you that I ask everybody who comes on the show. Book recommendations or podcasts or newsletters, or what do you read? What would you recommend other people read?
Yeah, I'm to be honest, I'm not. I admit, not the biggest of readers. It's been one of the little regret of mine, but I've picked out a couple in different genres. I love cooking, so I'm going to throw a little cookbook in there to start with, just a bit of fun. So Ottolenghi Simple is my Bible. I absolutely love that book. So please, anyone that's not used it or seen it, you'll find something in there. It's an amazing book. Book I'm reading at the moment, which I've come to quite late, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of listeners to this and viewers of this thinking, oh, well, that's been out a while, but This Is Going to Hurt, Adam Kay. It's about a young doctor making his way as a junior doctor moving into the health service. It is one of the funniest books I think I've ever read. It's absolutely brilliant. This Is Gonna Hurt by Adam Kay. And from a kind of commercial point of view, one of the founders at the Canopy where I now work, because I'm moving into a whole new sector, I was doing a bit of a deep dive into the creative agency sector, and told me to read a book called Blah, Blah, Blah by Dave Buonaguidi. So Dave Buonaguidi, co-founder of St. Luke's, co-founder of Karmarama, creative director at Channel 4. He played cricket for the Italian cricket team. He's an absolute maniac, this guy. He is hilarious, but it's a brilliant insight into the agency world and that creative agency world. So I would thoroughly recommend anyone reading Blah, Blah, Blah.
Brilliant. Well, 3 new books for the reading list. If you want to see what book everybody's recommended on the podcast, it's eximomarketingstrategy.com/reading-list. And there's a link in the show notes as well. And you can see what everybody else has recommended. So before I let you go, Stuart, last question. What one question were you expecting me to ask you that I haven't asked?
But the one I often get is, so how much money have you made out of 2020? And,
hundreds of millions. You get a slice of every IPL auction, don't you?
I wish, honestly. But to be honest, if we'd ever tried to do that or kind of license it out to the world or even to the counties, I don't think we would ever got off the ground. So the short answer is all I made was my salary, because I was doing my job. But yeah, that's a question that usually comes around, and surprised you didn't get that one in there, John.
But you get the eternal glory of appearing on the Strategy Sessions podcast as well, which will be, probably the highlight of your career, a distinguished career, but definitely the highlight, even if I can say that for you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much for your time, Stuart, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with episode 21. Thank you.